Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Wednesday, June 29th, 2022. It's actually my first broadcast, my last broadcast before I'll be taking a month off. So I'm glad to be here tonight, and I'll look forward to talking to you on the other side of my vacation. For those of you that might be new to this format, submit questions at any time, any comments, questions, topics you want me to address. You can always send these kinds of things also in between sessions. You can send it to webinar@evoketherapy.com, and we're happy to put them in the queue, answer them live, and then those will go into the podcast. We have at least one of those that's going to be coming today. We have some pre-submitted questions. And one of the things I've been doing lately is taking some time to go over some thoughts that I have in the beginning. And I wanted to share a couple of thoughts with you. I use my social media kind of like a therapy journal, where I'm putting out my ideas on a daily basis and sharing with you the thoughts that are coming up for me as I do my work. So I want to share a couple of those with you before we begin, what I'll call Brad's random topics or Reedy's random topics at the beginning, and then I'll get into the pre-submitted questions. The first post that I wanted to share with you this evening was this one. I wrote, and I want to give credit to my daughter, Emma. This really, she put some of these ideas together, and some of the words are hers. And Emma said to me the other day after consulting with me on a case, she wrote, "Defensiveness does not feel like defensiveness to the one exhibiting it. It feels like, quote, they don't understand me. They don't see the whole picture, unquote. So the task is to find and understand the other. This compassion is the precondition for transformation." And as we were describing this, we weren't actually talking about clients. We were talking about some trainings that we were doing. I just thought it was a simple and profound way to describe the experience of being defensive. People, in fact, people don't experience themselves being defensive often. Sometimes we do. We can see that. We can feel it. We're attuned to that at that level. That's for sure. And the more work that you do, the more able you are to discern and see your own defensiveness. But oftentimes, it's that feeling of not feeling seen or understood. And so our explanation, which Freud called a justification, a rationalization, our explanation is an attempt to ward off, a threat, an attack, something that doesn't feel safe. And as we grow in this life and evolve, we move from a place of trying to be good, imagining that we can be good, aspiring to be good, and eventually, oftentimes in midlife, sometimes it can happen earlier, there's a transformation where we accept the quote unquote bad parts of ourselves, the parts that people might find unbearable, unacceptable, bothersome, annoying, rejectable, unlovable. We take those parts and we make peace with them, and we realize that how other people react to us is about them and not about us. It's an indication of who they are. So for me, this quote, this idea, it gives me some peace that when I'm trying to explain myself and trying to share with the other person something that I think they're missing, I'm feeling a threat. I'm feeling defensive, right? I'm holding up a wall that says, "Don't attack me. I'm good. I'm not bad." It also helps me that when I'm working with training, whether I'm working at work or with clients in our intensives programs, or even out in the field when I'm training therapists, that when the person is defensive, something in the context that might be left over from previous contexts, like other relationships, other adults they've encountered, other therapists they've encountered, their parents. If I'm not doing something, then something is left over from those contexts where the person feels criticized, devalued. This quote, this idea offers me compassion both for myself and for the other person. I wrote this and it was related. Trusting your instincts, I wrote the other day, is great. But have you ever tried long-term therapy to learn to distinguish between your trauma responses and the responses that arise from your authentic self? It's a strange paradox that attachment-informed therapy, the kind of therapy that we practice, that I teach from at Evoke, is intended to help people become who they are, become more of themselves. And in a sense, that suggests that there's a trusting of one's own instincts. But long-term therapy can help you to interpret your instincts. You might have an inclination to say or do something in a certain situation or relationship, and that might be a trauma response. And long-term therapy can help you see that, can help you distinguish where it's coming from. Again, a trauma response is likely going to be some behavior, something you say that is trying to ward off a threat, versus the authentic self comes from a place of enoughness, okayness, esteem, right? Where we're in a place where we're saying, I want to be present. I want to be allowed to be here in this moment. Who I am matters. And so long-term therapy, the therapeutic intensives that we do, attachment-informed therapy that we practice, seeks to help you discover what's your trauma, what are your triggers, what's your style of defense. That's really what diagnoses are. They're styles of defenses. The wounds that we experience are more similar, more like than they are different. But our styles can vary widely. Somebody's going to be a people pleaser and try to make the pond smooth, try to smooth everything over all the time. Some people are going to be angry and fight and reactive. That was more of my teenage style. Some people might self-harm. Some people might self-medicate with alcohol or substances or food, gambling or sex or other addictive habit-forming behaviors. But beneath all of that style, right? The decor, if you will, of the defense, there's often the feeling of not being seen, of not being okay, of not being enough, of not being welcomed as who we are. And I suppose it's virtually impossible to escape childhood without some of that wounding. So again, the work at Evoke is not about picking on certain individuals in our culture, parents, and even clients, and saying you're particularly disturbed and wounded, but to say we're all in this together. One of the reasons why I self-disclose as much and as often as I do is to remind the folks that I teach, even the folks that I do psychotherapy with, that I'm not looking at this from an up-down position where I'm better than. I am with you on the journey. I am struggling. And while I might have studied more and developed and practiced skills because of my profession, I struggle with all of the things, virtually all of the things at a core level, at a basic level, that all the clients that I work with are struggling with. If I wasn't, I don't know that I could be that good for them, be helpful for them. If my clients are so different than me, I'm not talking about, again, the style and the decor, but at a fundamental level, if they're different than me, I don't know how helpful I can be to them, how I can relate to them. And that's why for me, maybe one of my most passionate the things I want to shout from the rooftops is that, therapists, it's not about being smart or intelligent or skilled. That's a part of it. But it's more about how much work that you've done. Because it's the work that you've done, the personal work that you've done, that allows you to create that kind of connection and safety with your clients and help them see where it's coming out of a wounded place, where their reactions are coming out of a wounded place versus where they're coming out of a more grounded and safe feeling place, a more okay place. These two last two posts before I get to your questions are part of it. The first one I wrote, want to teach accountability to children. One of the most common requests from parents in the application when they send the child to our program is that the child becomes more accountable. It's one of the top few things that we see. So you want to teach accountability to children, show them by owning your stuff and apologizing wherever you can. The best way to teach accountability to children is to show them what it looks like by owning your stuff and apologizing for it when you can. I mean, obviously, I think this makes sense logically, but I can't overstate it enough. It's a surrendering of power. When I find parents that struggle, I'm not talking about going into every detail of your trauma and asking your child to carry that. I'm not discussing or not teaching that at all. I'm talking about being able to say sorry, being able to say I still struggle with it. Just the other night, my teenage daughter was sharing something vulnerable for her around peer pressure, and I was able to say I still struggle with that too. And I do. It's not a technique. It's an honest fact. And you can almost see or maybe even at least feel their shoulders relax, a burden come off of them. Because then you're in it together, then you're connected. And that's the gold of attachment-based therapy or attachment-based parenting. Is that connection, that not aloneness. Now, I'm saying this because it's true, but I'm also saying it because I want to talk about this at the beginning, not at the end, before everybody starts kind of hanging up after I go over announcements. Finding you is what we offer to individuals, families, the non-identified patient, couples, to help them do this work, the kinds of things that I'm describing today. And it's not like other psychodrama programs. It's not like other experiential programs. I mean, there's obviously some similarities, but we are an attachment-based program. So the environment that we create outside of Park City, Utah, is to welcome you and to say, we're gonna witness your work. We're gonna connect to your work. We're gonna empathize with your work. And we're not gonna so much fix it, but provide a safe place for you to explore it and to tell the truth, and you'll fix or more accurately find yourself in the process. It's an immersive 4.5-day experience. We have a couple of spots in our July intensive, so I just wanted to point that out to you. I invite you to look to consider it. Contact Becky at our admissions department to talk to her more about that. All right, I'm happy to get to some of the pre-submitted questions here. Somebody writes, you mentioned more than once in this session that therapy is a lifelong pursuit of process. My adult son has been in therapy for about a decade and often talks about being fixed. How can I help him see that it is a complex, ongoing endeavor? Show him by your work. Show him that you're a work in progress. Work in process. That's right. By talking about how you haven't yet arrived. My favorite example, and it's one I just shared, is share with your children your susceptibility to peer pressure. Now, you've advanced from adolescence. I'll assume you've progressed since adolescence. You've built some esteem. You have some confidence. You may have done some work in the world, produced something. You may have gone through childbirth and raising young children. You've accomplished some things, and that's going to give you a kind of a baseline of confidence, which can help. It's part of what helped me move through my narcissistic wounding at a greater speed is the confidence that I had from my job. But ultimately, it's about creating a culture in your family. There's no one moment. To point it out to him would be to attack his defense. That position that he's taking is a defense. And by the way, I just want to say this, and some of you know this, most therapists, and when I say most, I could say it stronger than that. Many therapists think of therapy as something you go to and you fix things and then you come out of it. Why spend your life in therapy? I had a professor when there was some discussion around this topic say you don't want to spend your whole life being a therapy person. And back in school, I thought, well, he's smarter than I am. That seems true. That seems right. There were times early on in my participation in therapy where I wanted to graduate. I wanted to be done with it. Now, I can't wait to go to therapy, not because there's some big crisis, but because it's the one, I've said this before, it's the 1 hour a week that I can't get wrong. It's the 1 hour a week where I get to take care of myself. It's the 1 hour a week where I'm allowed to put down my trauma response, which is a lot of hypervigilance and overfunctioning. That's why I talk about this stuff so much. And I can rest and relax for 1 hour a week. And sometimes we talk about movies or writing or cases that I'm working on or clients or training. And of course, sometimes I talk about the relationship with my wife and my children, or my stress and anxiety and depression that I've struggled with at times in my life. We talk about all those things. What I've learned as I've grown in this work is that it takes a long time to learn to feel, to learn to be sensitive, to develop the kind of discernment that I'm describing. I wrote an article for Psychology Today about the abuse of graduating a client. A therapist pronouncing to the client, "We're done. You're done. You can move on." And I think it's because most therapists don't know what to do with a client when they're not in crisis with a definable problem. It's uncomfortable for them. They don't know how to just be with you. I'm not against other forms of therapy besides attachment-based therapy, but if attachment-based ideas aren't in your work, you can easily use those tools and skills and approaches to hurt people, to fix them, to inadvertently communicate that something is fundamentally wrong or different about you that we don't share together. So thanks for that question. Don't don't say anything to him. Just model it. Let him struggle with it. Let him figure it out. Even my son said last night when we were talking about one of my defenses, I can't remember what it is right now off the top of my head, but I think he said to my wife, he didn't use these words because he's not a clinician, but he said something like, "Don't rip away dad's defenses too quick. We don't know what we'll have if we rip that away." It was a light conversation, but I thought that was so wise of him to recognize that we have our defenses to protect us, and many therapists or unkind people, I'm actually quoting a book right now, will often rip away the defenses before they consider the costs. But therapy is not about knowing psychology. It's about the way you interact with somebody, the way you treat them, the way you feel about them, the way you think about them, how you respond to them. And if we can do it well and differently, and it offers a lot of modeling and information in parenting relationships and couple relationships. If we can learn how to be safe with people, create safety, create the what I call the precondition for transformation, or the precondition for change, it's safety. That's our job. Show up, tell the truth, and be safe when we can, as we can, for the people that we love. And then make human mistakes in both of those areas and come back and apologize and pick yourself up after you trip or fall, because that will be a lifelong process. Remember, the most enlightened folks that have walked on planet Earth, or at least the ones that we know about because they became famous, the most enlightened folks that have walked on Earth think of themselves as a lifelong project. People that are interested in being completed and being done, that's a defense. That's a trauma response. That's the attempt to be good, which is kind of the fundamental wound of a fractured attachment, that I must not be good or lovable enough to attract the attention of the people that love me in the way that I need. Somebody writes, "What do you think about teletherapy versus in person? What about BetterHelp?" When the pandemic broke out and we did our first intensive online. I think there might even be one of you who was in that might be on this broadcast tonight. I'm not quite sure. But I remember we charged a very low rate because I didn't have a lot of confidence that it could create the kind of emotional experience that in person can. And I was surprised after the first one that it was so much like being in person. And then we kept them online throughout the pandemic and even afterwards, because it's a lot less expensive for us. It's a lot less expensive for you. It's more affordable, both in terms of its time and its financial burden on all of us. We've included coaching as a component in our program: life coaching, parent couples coaching. We call it coaching because it's online and it's across state lines. So we're doing coaching. We have several employees in that area that aren't licensed therapists. So it really is coaching, but it has that attachment informed base to it, foundation to it. You can have right? I can be an attachment based coach. I can be an attachment based parent. an attachment-based clinician. So, since the pandemic has ended, I still go to therapy, of course. I tell you that that's woven all throughout all of these. I haven't asked my therapist if she's seeing people in person again because of the convenience. Um, there's something about being present, about seeing body posture, about feeling the room, about being physically in proximity to somebody that I think adds something to it. And so I think that there are pros and cons. It's much, much better than I thought. There are some clients that I have that prefer to talk to me only on the phone too. And I think in some ways it's kind of like, it's a way to kind of remain a little bit protective of themselves, protected, if you will. So I like it. I don't know BetterHelp specifically, but I like the idea because Evoke has its own version of BetterHelp with our coaching program. If you want coaches who are educated and taught in this area that I teach, the Evoke coaches do that, coaching at evoketherapy.com. So I'm surprised that it is as effective as it is. I was skeptical of it in the beginning. But I also remember the years, the decades that I worked as a frontline wilderness therapist when I was talking to parents on the phone, mostly, and saw them go through fantastic growth and transformation. So I think I had that experience first, and that gave me more of the confidence to kind of formalize the process at Evoke. But yeah, I think it's good. I think it has some payoffs and some trade-offs, I should say, but I think it's a fantastic process. Somebody writes, Brad, are you aware of another Buddhist-based recovery program called Recovery Dharma? Somebody told me about that. I think it might be actually a break-off of Refuge Recovery. I think I've been told that. I haven't gone and done the research at length, but any kind of support group, any kind of therapeutic process that works for you, I support. I have clients that ask me about EMDR. I don't do MDR, and I say, try it. Give it a try. If it works, it works. That's the measure. If it works to make you feel better, to deal with whatever symptoms you might be struggling that are getting in the way of you living a fuller, happier, more meaningful life, if it works, great. I don't know it. So if you know more about it, please share it with us at webinar@evoketherapy.com, and I'm happy to add it to the slide where I invite you to go to support groups. Somebody writes, my daughter is 23 years old, and I have tried my best not to say anything to her about what her next step. She says, stays at home all day. Doesn't work. I need to set boundaries. She can either go to a residential treatment or needs to move out, but I can't do that to her. She has a mental illness. Is that part 2, or is that okay? Your job is boundaries. And boundaries are primarily for self-care. But let me note this. In the role of a parent, I believe, you can disagree, that's fine. I believe as a parent, at least for me, that I have an obligation to my children to support them to get to where they need to go. Now, I need to be careful that my agenda, my vision for their life doesn't eclipse them and theirs. That's one of the reasons, although I primarily go to individual therapy, it's rare that I go to couples therapy or family therapy, although I have done that. But my primary work is done in therapy, individual therapy week. But one of the things that happens in that is to get a reality check, to talk about that, to develop what I described earlier, the kind of discernment. Is this coming from my authentic self, my connection to my role as a parent? Or is it coming from a trauma response? Is it coming from a trauma where I want to control things? I'm feeling anxious and afraid. I think I know the answer, so forth and so on. Is it aimed at helping the child become themselves? Am I enabling, rescuing those kinds of behaviors? I'm not too fond of those phrases, but you know what I'm describing. So your job is boundaries. Your job is, what can I live with? What's my role? How can I You get to decide. This is the toughest thing I'm about to say to you, but it's not the most important, but it's up there. The reason I can't give you advice on specific decisions, when to get divorced, when to stay married, when to draw a line in the sand with your child, like this question is asking about, is because the goal is not a doing thing, it's a being thing. Attachment-based therapists don't think about what to do. We think about becoming who you are, and out of that place, you do what's right for you. So, for example, if I were to give you specific advice on what to say and do to your daughter, I'd be subverting the entire process that I just spend my life, what I just spent this hour teaching about. I'd be giving you my truth. So I'll use divorce as an example because it's easier to talk about it that way. If somebody comes to me and says, should I get a divorce? My response is, that's up to you. But in the meantime, the work is the same either way. I would say the same thing to you. The work is the same either way. Do your work. My experience is doing your work, which is the work of becoming who you are, your most authentic, highest self, your most grounded, present, and aware self. That as you do that, the decisions will come out of that. You'll be clear about what to do. Because in all relationships, marriage, parenting, friendships, there are sacrifices and compromises. And for years, I used to say to my therapist, am I being a jerk? Am I being an ass? Am I being too rigid? Or am I being a doormat? Am I being too selfless? Am I not taking care of myself? And essentially, without saying it, she would say, those are the right questions. But really what you're asking is, who are you? What do you need? Because there are things I can compromise with my wife that are okay. And there are some things that I just couldn't give up. Now, I will admit something. My bandwidth for what I can compromise has gotten larger and larger as I've done the work. That's true. I'm more okay with a wider breadth of behavior from everybody in my life. But a lot of that's because I do better at self-care and boundaries. A lot of it's because I feel more okay about myself today than I did 10 years ago. It's because I've taken more responsibility for my internal state and not made my children and my friends and my wife responsible for it. Can you start to hear the themes of what the work is? The work is, even for the newest parent listening to me, the work is to figure out what your truth is, what your values are, what your priorities are. And yes, your bandwidth or your tolerance will increase over time. That's just a part of our growth. We become less triggered, less at the mercy of a child's success or failure or a spouse's anger or sadness, less beholden to those behaviors, those reactions, those relationship dynamics than we were when we were younger. That's part of it. But ultimately, it's still the same question, which is, who are you? That's the shift in the parent and the journey of the heroic parent, from the question from what should I do to who am I, who is my child, and what's my relationship to them and their problems. That's the shift. Thank you. Somebody writes, after coming back to my family of origin to help take care of an ailing sister who lives with my father and 2 other siblings, the dysfunction was greatly palpable. It has taken a lot of work to keep myself regulated and not fall into old behaviors. However, through this, I was able to have an honest conversation with my teen son about how our own family dysfunction has played into our loss of connection and his addiction. I was able to clearly see that I would never want him to feel that way. I feel coming back to my child home. That is so good. That is so good. So healthy, so aware. I wrote something a couple of years ago about Thanksgiving, why you shouldn't go home for Thanksgiving. My daughter Emma, some of you may have seen it because I shared it on my social media. She wrote a blog for a local company here. I believe it was called Tricky Father Feelings was the title, I think. And she talked about on Father's Day that our relationships with our fathers are complicated. She told a story about me in it, and about how, yes, she loves me and I've given her things, but there's also been wounds and hurts. And so it's complicated. It's tricky. And what I said in my blog from a few years ago about Thanksgiving is you can go back if you want, and you can not go back if you don't want to. You can go back because you think you should. You can go back because you want to see your family of origin with new eyes. In this case, you want to help your sister, an ailing sister. But when you go back with your new eyes and new ears, you'll be sensitive. That's what happens in this work. When you do it, you're more sensitive. It's like the world goes from black and white to 4K Technicolor. I think Technicolor is an old term for just color, but it turns into the most vivid three-dimensional experience because you can see, just walking into a group of people today versus 10 years ago, I see and hear things very, very, very differently. If you've been at this just even a little while, you have that experience too. Old conversations don't make sense anymore. Old ideas don't make sense anymore. Old ways of operating and thinking and relating don't make sense anymore. That's what waking up and becoming a chain breaker is about. Breaking the chain of intergenerational trauma. The fact that you come back and give that gift to your son is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So I want to say one thing. I always try to say this, and I don't know how well it comes across. Maybe you can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a thumb in the middle if you kind of get it. Sometimes, folks, this is not an uncommon occurrence because I might make references to it, but sometimes folks use the Buddha as an example about how to respond to people, how to relate to people that they care about, their spouse, their children, their friends, their coworkers. And they'll say to me, I tried to have a Buddha mentality, a non-judgmental, compassionate, patient mentality. And sometimes I'll say to them, that's a wonderful aspiration, but let me point something out. The Buddha left his family and sat under a tree for years. Let me say that again. The Buddha left his family, left the role of being a prince in a castle, a wealthy family, and took care of himself far away. That's the magic of the Buddha, not the compassion. That's just the result of the work of going away, of sitting under that Bodhi tree, of getting in touch with the essence of who he was and how he was connected to everybody. And the Buddha meditated and removed himself from social gatherings, from relationships, from people as much and as often as he needed. What I wish people would think about when they think about the Buddha is that part, because that's the hard part. Going and taking a vacation, I'll use that as a crude, simple kind of example. To take care of yourself, whatever your form of that is. Let's say you took off for a month and did that every year. You're going to come back with more capacity, with more patience. You're going to come back more like the Buddha because you did the thing that he did to get what he got. So when we talk about becoming the Buddha or the Christ or compassionate or Gandhi or Yoda or Mother Teresa or Maya Angelou, pick your hero, Martin Luther King Jr. When we talk about embodying those people, responding to the people around us in that same sensibility, remember something. All of them were selfish in healthy ways. And they had the courage to do that work, to be capable of doing the work that you're describing. So when we talk about becoming like Yoda, we have to do what he did, which is retreat to self-care, even when other people thought he shouldn't, or thought they needed him more, or thought that he was being selfish, or he dropped balls or responsibilities, right? We have to face all those dragons to do our self-care. And if we do that, if we face that, we'll come back with the kind of attributes we all admire in these amazing folks. But to just generate those out of nowhere without taking care of yourself, that's insanity. That doesn't make any sense. You're not putting any fuel in you. You got nothing to run on. So I hope that makes sense. I have a difficult time describing that, but I hope that makes sense. Somebody says, I know sharing our feelings with our children in an attempt to control them or ask them to take care of us is damaging, i.e., quote, when you smoke weed, it upsets me, so stop smoking weed, unquote. And I feel it may be positive to share our feelings with them to help them feel less alone. For example, I can tell you miss your grandma. I understand I miss her too. I'd love more guidance on sharing feelings, when and when not to do it, and how to discern between the two. Great question. Again, it's hard to describe behaviors because when I say in the book, I'm almost at the point where I want to tell parents not to share feelings with their children. I said almost. What I'm saying is be mindful. What's your intention? And I think that's the practice, is asking yourself, what's my intention? Think of virtually any behavior toward somebody you're in a relationship with. You learn to ask yourself, what's my intention? Therapy is the therapist saying, how are you feeling right now? And you say, I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling hopeful, optimistic, discouraged, whatever the feeling is. What they're teaching you to do is they're teaching you how to feel. And when you become better at feeling and better at understanding, I remember years ago, before I understood nearly, a lot of what I talked to you about on the podcasts and broadcasts today, I remember saying to a father, it sounds like you're scared and angry. He said, I'm not scared or angry. It's just that my son needs to do X, Y, and Z. And I remember thinking, wow, he's unaware of what he's feeling. He's definitely unaware of what his parenting is communicating to his child, how he feels. And he's absolutely unaware of how those emotions being piled on top of the child are affecting the child. So it's about learning how to feel. It's about asking yourself before you say something, what's my intent? And being honest with yourself, courageously, brutally honest with yourself. I'm not perfect at it. I am much, much better at it. And yes, in casual social situations, when I'm listening to people, that's what I hear now that I didn't hear before. I can hear what everybody's feeling. I remember I was training staff. I did an in-service like we do once a week. And then I went out to the group that day, and there was some carryover from my staff training. I was sharing with one of the groups, Trina Grader's group, about the in-service from the morning. I was talking about anxiety and controlling behaviors and codependency and those type of things. And one of the staff asked in front of the clients, she said, but when is the time when I can lecture? When is the time when I can give people advice? And I said, would you like to know what it sounds like when somebody gives me advice or tries to teach me something when I don't need it or I didn't ask for it? It just feels like their needs are in the way and they're not going to own them. And I just want to get away from it. And the woman, the staff member said, oh, that's really helpful. That's what it feels like. That's what this program at Evoke does for families and individuals. Whether your child's at our wilderness program or you're at an intensive, you learn to feel. That's what happens in the field with the students. We stop them 100 times a day, virtually, and we just say, how are you feeling? You just said something sarcastic. What's going on? You're not hiking anymore. What's going on? You threw a rock at Joey. What's going on? You didn't write your mother and father this week. What's going on? You left in the middle of Brad's session with you. What's going on? That's what we're doing. We're teaching people by being curious ourselves about the connection between their feelings, because most people don't understand and most people are so unconscious. They don't know that their unconscious and their emotions are driving the bus. They're They're in the 7th row. And the goal of therapy is to get in the driver's seat to some extent, right? To become more aware of the wounds from the past, the wounds from the present, how they connect. What am I afraid of? You know, even this week, there were 2 or 3 times when I had the choice to confess a feeling behind something I said to my wife that she was hurt by or frustrated by. And at each point, I remember thinking, I can lie. My instinct is to lie about it or to cover it up or to rationalize it. And in the 3 examples that I'm referring to, I was able to say, this is really what was going on. And in all 3 cases, my wife said, thank you. That makes sense. I can connect to that. I'm not hurt or angry anymore because now I can see you and realize that your reaction or what you said was about you. That's what psychotherapy does. That's what attachment-based psychotherapy does. That's what the evoke version of therapy does, is get you aware of what's going on. And therapists are young therapists or therapists that aren't trained in this model are as guilty of it as anybody. And the worst thing in the world is that combination between power that a parent has or another authority figure or a therapist has and their lack of awareness, their lack of consciousness. That combination of a lack of consciousness and awareness with power leads to significant abuse. So thank you for that. I know there's more to the question, but I think I answered it all. I hope I did. Become aware of why you're saying it. Practice that. Ask yourself and be ruthlessly honest with yourself and get some support from a therapist. Because therapy is supposed to help us feel okay, even in our symptoms, even in our mess. Because only when we feel okay and safe can we explore that mess, that rubble, that mess that is our humanness. Somebody writes, my question is, beyond wilderness and intensives, can you comment on the valuable support your staff provide? As background, I admitted my son into your wilderness program on 11/11/2020. Less than a month later, I attended an in-person intensive. Emma, my daughter, now supports a regular group therapy session for my entire intensive group by our request. Even now, 18 months since we originally bonded. Beyond wilderness and intensives, can you comment on the additional and tailored services your staff are passionate about? I mean, Emma's doing it sounds like a group coaching experience, but it's really these last slides. I call it coaching because, to be clear, again, including Emma, these aren't necessarily licensed therapists. Some of them are, but they're folks who are informed in the attachment model. So essentially, you can have telecoaching, which is like teletherapy. You can have a group experience. You can have a pursuits trip. Pursuits is our adventure trip where we use our staff and our therapists to help you guys have an adventure. A couple of days, a few days, several days, as long as a month for adults or families. My passion is, I know it sounds silly and trite, but one of my passions is my social media page. Because I wrote something this week that, in fact, it was this one. You know, this post I shared with you earlier, defensiveness doesn't feel like defensiveness to the one exhibiting it. It feels like they don't understand me. They don't see the whole picture. I shared that, and somebody that follows me shared a 3-part video about how seen she felt. We had no conversation with each other. She shared nothing with me. This quote was independent of her, and so our social media pages, my social media page, is another part that we're passionate about. I also, I'm doing a parent day in New York City where we've just decided today that we're going to do an all-day parent retreat in November. I believe November 4th is what we have it penciled for, that I'm going to lead. That's going to last 6 hours, where we're going to have a large group of people online, and we're going to do question and answer, kind of like a webinar, except for I'll be able to see your faces. We'll be able to interact. I'll have a 3-part curriculum over the 6 hours. We'll take a break for lunch. So we're doing that. I'm going to do a therapy training around the beginning of the new year. So intensives, coaching, trying to create more and more experiences. I get invited to Emma's going to Houston, Texas later this year to present to a group of women professionals. We're willing to do anything that works. I want this message out in the world. If you know Oprah or Tim Ferriss or Gwyneth Paltrow, I'm happy to talk to them because they don't know. Even the folks like Maria Shriver and Gwyneth Paltrow who are trying to bring in professionals. Oprah has done it for years and years. They don't know that the professionals that they're talking to are missing some of the keys on the keyboard. So I'm passionate about making a dent in the universe from an individual session to any speaking facilitation group process that we can have. One of the reasons why I do the podcast or have these webinars. In the beginning, my first approximately 650 broadcasts, there were no podcasts. But we've been doing podcasts now for a while. We have about 500 in our archive library because I want to get the message out. And like I said, we're going to have a therapist training also after the parent day. We're going to have a therapist training where I'm teaching therapists. I hope maybe nobody will sign up for it, but I hope therapists in our field and in residential schools and programs will be here because I hear so many complaints from parents about not feeling seen, feeling punished, feeling judged by their child's therapist in this program. And we parents need and deserve, but maybe more importantly, need every bit of compassion, just as much compassion as our children need, because we're just children with wrinkles and receding hairlines and aching joints and muscles, right? I don't know if I answered it, but I hope I did. All right, looks like we don't have any questions pressing. I'm working on my third book. I'm going to be writing a manual for attachment therapy later this year. I'm working on it now, getting all of my thoughts together, and I'll be working on it now. But my two first books, The Journey of the Rogue Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are on Amazon. And by the way, reminding that question, we did a play in New York City a few years ago, 2016-17, played it at the Kennedy Center, in fact, toured a little bit, where we used theater and music to talk about this message. So I'm fine with any medium. If you would like to give back to people who can't afford therapy, our three charitable partners are ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, and EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. We have support groups, another thing that we do, that are open to any wilderness, current or alumni family. June 30th is the next one. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting for wilderness alumni. July 26th is the next offering for that one. And then once a month, we have a support group for alumni of our intensives program. July 12th is that one. Malia at evoketherapy.com is the place to go to ask questions or to go to our website and sign up there. If you want to do a deep dive, there's a couple of spots left in our July 14th. I implore you to give Becky a call and to talk about it. There are a few applications out, so it might fill up in the next day or two. We also have them online. August 26th is the next offering, and then the next in-person after July is August 10th through 14th. Intensives at evoketherapy.com is the place to go. I've already discussed coaching quite a bit and even pursuits programs. The support groups that we ask you to try, if you're a parent of a student, we ask you to try any combination of 6 of these. Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamilyAnonymous.org, AdultChildren.org, or RefugeRecovery.org. I'm happy to add the other one if you'll give me some information on it if you know about it. Or the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, is a great place to go to get information, support that is free in your local area, your local chapter. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, or go to soundcloud.com and search Finding You there. You can also find these recordings on Evoke's YouTube channel. If you'd like to see my face, if you want to see the slides, you can go there. You can find Evoke and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy. You can also go to Instagram and find Evoke Therapy Intensives there. using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And then our blog is another thing that we do for you all. So if you have if you want to peruse the blog or be connected to it, go to our website, search our blog. We have new content each week. Like I said, this is my last broadcast until August. I'm going to rest. I'm going to go sit under a Bodhi tree metaphorically somewhere and take care of myself. Travis Slagle is going to be covering for me. We might have another guest or two to come in and do something. And then on the podcast, I have 4 or 5 episodes that I've archived that will be releasing during the month of July, so that when I'm off, those won't be broadcast as webinars, but you can look on our podcast site on your favorite podcast app, and you can listen to those there. All right, folks. Thanks for joining me this evening. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. For and on behalf of the people that you love, thank you for showing up and being willing to do your work. That is the greatest expression of love that I know. To do your own work is a great expression of love for you and the people that you're close to. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you in August. Bye-bye.